Perhaps a little taste of what we expect to find over the next few days as we advance further up into Kosovo itself. Here, a local shop, not much left of that. All the windows have been caved in. There's broken glass everywhere. It's a very eerie feeling. This really is a little ghost village at the moment. Just the Gurkhas holding positions. They've been going up some of the side roads around some of these little alleyways, just checking to see if there's anybody around, checking to see if there's any mines left behind, if there's any booby traps. I think they're on their guard for that all the time. And back down there's the border post where we came across, now no longer manned by any Yugoslav officers at all, just the KLA there on the corner. Just they came without guns, interestingly, the KLA. They came to greet the NATO forces, as they said. How they will generally react over the next few days, we're not really sure.
Jeremy Thompson reporting there earlier.
Are going to be surface-load mines, anti-tank mines, on the road surface. Now they're easy to move. If this was a high-intensity conflict, if you had to push through to get to a military objective, there are a number of options. You can either stick an armoured vehicle with a blade on the front and scoop them out of the road and then push on, or you can send in field engineers who can actually hand drag them out, put hooks on them and drag them out. But the problem is there may be anti-tamper devices on them, which would set them off if you start messing around with them.
And also, this is in a tunnel, and you can't afford the tunnel.
It's in a tunnel. You can't afford to close a tunnel because it'll slow down the whole operation. So what they've now got to do is send in field engineers to look at the mines, to defuse the mines, make sure there are no anti-handling devices on them that are going to set them off, and to pull them physically out of the way and put them to the side of the road so they can push on.
And this is exactly what was expected, this sort of delay?
This was the sort of thing that the force was expecting, and that is why you've got a large number of engineers right up forward.
The NATO-led troops who will protect you are beginning to go in. Mr. Milosevic has failed utterly in his efforts to erase your history, your culture, your presence from your land. Soon, you will be going home. Now we must make sure you can return safely. I know you're anxious to reunite with your loved ones, to find out what condition your homes are in, to reclaim your land. But before you do, we must be certain all the Serbian forces have left and see to it that international forces are in place throughout Kosovo. We must start clearing the landmines, some of which may be in your homes, in your community buildings, along roads and bridges. We need to make sure there's enough food, water, and shelter to meet your needs. And we most urgently need to reach the desperate people who've been trapped in the hills and forests of Kosovo. Until all of you can return in safety, we will provide aid in Albania and Macedonia. And we will not forget the kindness of the nations that have given you shelter or their own needs for assistance and stability. As you prepare to go home, I know you have many reasons to be bitter and full of anger. But I ask you not to let Mr. Milosevic have the victory of seeing your spirits broken and your hearts turned to stone. No one should do to the ethnic Serbs who live in Kosovo what their leaders did to you. Do not prove Mr. Milosevic right that people of different ethnic and religious groups are inevitably enemies. No human being should ever have to experience what you have been forced to endure. We will seek effective justice through law for the perpetrators of these crimes. But we must have an end to ethnic cleansing and the beginning of a Kosovo where every child can go to school, every family can practice its faith, every community can live a normal life in peace. That is what we fought for. That is what NATO peacekeepers will help build when they go in. That is the future we now have a chance to shape together. I thank you for your courage and your endurance, and I look forward to seeing you go home.
Welcome to BBC World News. I'm Lise Doucette. The headlines. NATO forces enter Kosovo to begin their peacekeeping mission. It's one of the biggest military operations in Europe since the Second World War. Helicopter-borne troops lead the way. So far, the operation appears to have the full cooperation of the Yugoslav authorities. But Russian troops have beaten NATO to Pristina. They're now at the airport there. NATO forces have begun moving into Kosovo in one of the biggest military undertakings in Europe since the Second World War. It began at dawn with a wave of British troops airlifted in helicopters across the border from the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Their task is to secure the high ground overlooking the main route to the Kosovo capital, Pristina. A huge convoy of troops and vehicles have started moving across the border to begin the ground operation. The British troops are being joined by French and German forces. They're the advance guard of a force that will eventually number about 50,000. Our reporter Ragi Omar, who's in Blace on the Macedonia-Kosovo border, reports now on the arrival of NATO's peacekeeping mission in Kosovo.
The lead units of British forces began assembling at the Kosovo border in the early hours of the morning. The British soldiers can be under no illusion about the enormity of the task that lies ahead of them and the dangers that are surely there. The Gurkhas and the paratroopers who are at the heart of the initial ground force came prepared with huge amounts of equipment, armored personnel carriers and ammunition. They waited at the border crossing point as the last frustrating hours passed until H hour, when they would go into Kosovo. As they did so, news came through that the Russians had beaten them to it and had gone into Pristina, the capital of Kosovo. As the dawn light rose over this mountainous region, at 0500 local time came the historic moment. Chinook helicopters carrying British paratroopers and their vehicles entered Kosovo. Their task to secure the high points around the main route into Kosovo. They were supported by American Apache helicopters. Within minutes, the ground forces moved in. They were led by the 5th Airborne Brigade. Close behind came the Gurkhas, who marched into Kosovo.
After months of having waited for the air campaign to achieve its results, NATO forces with British soldiers in the vanguard are finally in Kosovo. Their main priority will be establishing their headquarters. The problem is they will find that the Russians are already there. Ragi Omar, BBC News on the Macedonian-Kosovo border.
Well, our correspondent Mike Williams is in the Kosovo capital, Pristina. He says it appears that British paratroopers are now at the airport, and a short time ago I asked him what their job would be as part of the NATO contingent.
First of all, to secure the airport and also to secure the road from Macedonia. Once the airport is secured, we understand that will become a base of operations for Qershor, for the Kosovo peacekeeping mission here. After that, I think they will be looking primarily to escort out the rest of the final remaining Yugoslav forces who are still here, to take them out of the country so that effectively Belgrade has no voice here. After that then begins the very, very long and arduous task of rebuilding this place, of rebuilding it physically, rebuilding society here and guaranteeing the safe return of the refugees.
But in the last 24 hours, have you seen a lot of movement of Serbian forces out of Pristina?
Yes, we drove down from Belgrade yesterday and saw many thousands of military vehicles, mainly the air defense systems, the anti-aircraft guns, the surface-to-air missiles and the mobile radar systems. They were heading north in great numbers, and interspersed among them were many civilian vehicles. Serb citizens from Kosovo here clearly deciding that Kosovo under NATO, under the international peacekeeping mission, is not a place where they can feel comfortable.
And indeed, how difficult will it be for NATO forces to set up an operation in Pristina after what has been 3 months of NATO bombing? Everything must be completely devastated when it comes to basic infrastructure in which for them to operate.
Strangely, it's not, Lise. In Pristina here, a number of strategic targets were hit very early on in the war. Since then, NATO has left the capital alone. Many people came in from the outlying villages to seek sanctuary here, and the capital was largely untouched. It's outside Pristina, the military targets outside, notably the airport, which will be the new base for Qershor. That was hit very badly. And of course, a great deal of damage exists in the hills and valleys where the Serb security forces were active, in Drenica, around the areas, around the towns of Peć and Prizren. It's there that the greatest destruction will be found.
And do they expect members of the KLA to try to reach Pristina as well?
I think there's no expectation of that at the moment. There are still many security forces here, and NATO are hoping to fill that vacuum to make sure that when Yugoslav forces pull out, there's no opportunity for KLA fighters to come here and effectively impose any security measures, any military control. That is, NATO insists in their hands and their hands alone. The KLA will be disarmed and demilitarized according to the agreement. It's going to be a difficult task. People here are very nervous and very untrusting of almost everybody else here. But NATO have committed themselves to that task. It is a large one, and we shall have to wait and see in the coming weeks and months if that's possible.
Mike Williams, our correspondent in the Kosovo capital, Pristina. Well, as we've been reporting in the programme, the KFOR troops are continuing to press further into Kosovo, setting up bases and securing the transport routes. Our correspondent, Jeremy Cook, is with a group of forces in the vanguard of this operation. I asked him how it was progressing.
Yeah, Lise, I've actually flown in with a parachute regiment, the British parachute regiment, this morning from Macedonia. It was just about a 15-minute helicopter ride, but it's put us some 35 kilometers inside Kosovo in the town of Qershor. Now, what I'm looking at now is the main road, which will take, later in the day, if everything goes according to plan, NATO vehicles up from the Macedonian border towards the capital of Kosovo, Pristina. What I can see as I'm speaking to you is parachute regiment soldiers walking up the road, but with many of their colleagues taking up defensive positions along the flanks of the road, scanning with their telescopic sights into the hills of Kosovo to try to see if there's any threat here at all. So far they haven't found any threat, I hasten to add. The skies have been full of helicopters all morning, as well as the British helicopters which have been bringing the troops in, not just the parachute regiment, but the Gurkhas as well. We've also had 6 American Apache attack helicopters flying support missions, basically escorting these troops up to this forward position.
And yet,
working to make sure a bridge in this town was clear of mines or any other ordnance, and they've completed their job now, so they've effectively opened that bridge. That, I'm sure, will be happening many times over along this stretch of road. And the soldiers here are all saying, yeah, they're very pleased with the way it's going. They say they're hours ahead of the schedule which their officers had set for them, and they really just want to get on with the job, because for them, as well as everybody else here, the images of refugees are the ones that are stuck in their minds. A lot of them say that's given the soldiers a lot of motivation to try to do their best to make conditions here safe so the refugees can come back as soon as possible.
And now that they have secured the route, what is the main task, the next task for the forces that you are with?
The forces that I'm with have secured the route up as far as we are, but they still have to go on into Kosovo, at least. We're more or less at the forward position now, but there are many kilometers of road ahead. We're told, though, that the Serb authorities have been very cooperative, and that's probably why people are saying that the route is not likely to be a problem. As well as securing this route, though, obviously they're trying to make contact with the local people, particularly the Kosovo Liberation Army fighters, who have been in evidence today. They come out of their bunkers and come down to greet the NATO troops, and all contacts between NATO soldiers and the KLA at the moment seem to be very friendly indeed. The Kosovo Liberation Army seem to be delighted to see NATO on the ground here in Kosovo.
Very briefly, Jeremy, General Sir Michael Jackson described the mission as a robust one. How quickly will NATO forces move to disarm the KLA fighters that they'll meet?
That's an open question at the moment, Lise. I think that there's a lot of politics in that, and it's not something which the soldiers on the ground, or indeed me as a correspondent travelling with them, are privy to.
Our troopers have also arrived in Pristina at the airport.
There is still some confusion over that, Lise. The latest reports say they are still slogging their way up the slow road from Macedonia. It's a road that's been heavily mined in the past, heavily protected by the Yugoslav military, knowing that NATO could come up it at any moment. So as far as we're aware, and I must say the situation is still confused, the only foreign troops in or around the capital Pristina are the Russians, who've taken control of the airport, which certainly was to have been NATO's main base of operations here.
And briefly, Mike, what is the mood in the city as they wait for NATO to arrive?
People here are fearful of NATO, but they're very glad to have seen the Russians arrive in this bizarre manner in the early hours of the morning. They were jubilant when they came, waving and cheering, smiling and firing their guns into the air. They are banking on the Russians to protect them from the NATO that they fear so much after 11 weeks of bombing, and from the reaction of their former neighbors, the Albanians of Kosovo.
Mike Williams, thank you very much for that update from Pristina, the capital of Kosovo, where we understand that Russian troops are now outside the airport, and there are reports that British paratroopers may have also arrived there. Well, as NATO forces move into Kosovo, let's go now live to Blace in the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, where our correspondent George Eakin is standing by. George, we've been seeing a massive movement of troops going in both by air and on land. How large is the force that's gone in this morning?
Well, 5 Airborne Brigade is effectively the 1st Battalion of the Parachute Regiment. That's about 650 men, and the Royal Gurkha Rifles, a similar amount. Skopje achieved their initial objective, which was to secure the Kachanik Pass. That's the narrow valleys along which this road behind me runs for the first 12 kilometers or so towards Pristina. That's been achieved, and now the commanders are starting to send along elements of 4 Armoured Brigade, which is the tanks effectively and infantry that will be the main bulk of the force going along this road today.
And the men are going in with their rifles and their machine guns loaded. A reminder, of, if one was needed, of potential dangers ahead?
Absolutely, there's a myriad of potential dangers. I think the most immediate one will be that of mines, as Mike Williams was explaining, and demining engineers are a very important component of all the early deployments into Kosovo. Of course, there's the more general problem that the peacekeepers dread, which would be becoming pig in the middle between two sides, the KLA rebels and the Serbs, along confrontation lines as the Serbs attempt to withdraw.
And General
could bring down that tunnel and block the entire route. Now, there are subsidiary routes, and we gather that the French Foreign Legion are forging a way to the east of the main British advance. So there are alternative routes, but none of them are as good as the route that these soldiers are on. You see those boxes to the left, they're marked off, they could be booby-trapped. Ammunition boxes are the sort of thing that get booby-trapped by a withdrawing army. Now, you can see some graffiti on the walls there. Cyrillic graffiti, Serb graffiti, and that is SRS, the Serbian Radical Party, which is Vojislav Šešel's party, and its extremist politics. So you can get a feel for the sort of the tension that's on the ground there. There we see, I'm not going to mention his name, but somebody who I know from a long time ago, coming up forward now with the 5 Airborne Brigade element.
And this is 5 Airborne Brigade's first taste of combat.
Yes, it's the first time that 5 Airborne Brigade, as such, have actually been on operations of any type as a brigade. And ironically, 5 Airborne Brigade were due to be changed and remoulded into a heliborne force and renamed. So just before they disappear, they will actually have a battle honour. And what a battle honour it will be. This is an extraordinary operation they're taking part in. And what we're seeing at the moment is really what it's all about. It's infantry soldiers on the ground dealing with situations minute by minute and having to use their initiative, relying on their training. And 5 Airborne Brigade are big on initiative and pretty light on equipment. You know, it's basically
it could be Second World War pictures we're looking at.
This is what it's all about. This is the sort of soldiering that people think about whenever they think of the army, not the mechanized stuff. This is real hardcore infantry slog, marching up the road to Pristina, having to find mines and clear them. It's dangerous work, but Britain is very lucky to have such a supremely professional element to put in at the front of the advance. Here we see more Gurkha soldiers now.
The size of the backpacks.
Huge packs. There'll be some of these characters will be carrying up to between 80 and 120-pound rucksacks with ammunition, food, batteries for radios, all these sort of things they need to sustain operations. There we saw them getting into a Puma helicopter, flying over the refugee camp there, at Blace now, flying north into Kosovo from Macedonia. We see the door gunner there with his 7.62 machine gun. He will be looking out for the odd individual who may wish to take a pot shot at the helicopter, keeping an eye on what's going on underneath the helicopter, because that's really where the pilot cannot see. And if they do get shot at by by the odd sniper or whatever. It's his job to put down as much fire as possible to put the sniper off his aim, but let's hope that doesn't happen.
We're going to break away, Duncan, because one of our 4 correspondents on the scene, on the march as it were, is David Chater, who was right at the forefront and entered Kosovo several hours ago at the front of the NATO intervention. David, where are you now?
The whole column that I'm with is now stalled at a tunnel just outside Qershor. What's happened is that they've been clearing the area for mines and booby traps. They did a controlled explosion, but the result of that explosion means that the tunnel is now unpassable. That's what the message is being passed down the line at the moment. I'm actually right next to the armoured scimitars of the household cavalry. There's a massive roadblock here at the moment. I can just see the bridge, which is just outside Qershor, and that's where they've been disarming the Serbian military units. But I'm told now that they've got orders to roll in 5 minutes' time, so whatever the block was in the tunnel, I think it's now been cleared. I've watched the engineering units and members of the ordnance teams going in who deal with unexploded devices. So whatever's happened now, they've managed to do the trick and clear that obstruction. But there's been a hell of a hold-up here. The whole column is actually blocked on the road for miles back. And
thanks very much, Fiona. Well, whilst the engineers and paratroopers are trying to clear the road up ahead, we're just going to give you another flavour of what life, or rather the lack of it, is like inside Kosovo here for the first time. We're in a small Albanian village just on the road behind where the troops are. In fact, British signallers have just left from beside us here and headed up the road, so they're providing communications for the brigade as they advance. So it looks as if they felt there was some movement ahead, so they're obviously going to move up there. This village is being looked after by the Gurkhas at the moment, but just to give you a feel of what it's like, I mean, it is a deserted village. There are no civilians here whatsoever. They appear to have left many weeks ago. There are just signs of shattered lives, of chaos everywhere. Every one of these shops seems to have been smashed in. There's bullet holes, shell holes in the windows of most of them. This is the local bank. It's been smashed in at the front there. I don't know whether that was a bank raid or whatever. But beside it, you can see cars that have just been, in fact, abandoned by the local villagers. And in fact, we can see it's just a stark smudge on the wall, but there are bloodstains down there. And in fact, right away across the pavement here, there's broken glass, and we can see little brown smears where there has been, where there appears to have been bloodstains, suggestions there really that there was some brutal events went on here in recent weeks as the villagers left. Down the road there's a whole park of cars left by the Kosovars as they fled over the border into the safety of Macedonia. And here we've had contact with KLA soldiers this morning, all very amicable, but they've just come out of the mountains. They said that the last of the Serbs left this village about 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. They came down out of the mountains then, just a handful of them, some of them armed with their Kalashnikovs. They're not sure quite what they're supposed to be doing. They're waiting for orders from their commanders. They seem to know that the Serbs had mined some of the bridges and they had seen a lot of anti-tank mines placed by the Yugoslav army up in the hills around here, all up in these high hills surrounding this ravine that heads on up the road to Pristina. On the other side of the road, we've seen booby traps. We're just hoping to talk to a Gurkha officer in a minute to tell us more about that. But it is a very haunting sight indeed. There is no sign of life at all in the village apart from the soldiers that have now moved in to secure it and hold the road as the advanced columns of the NATO forces start rumbling up the road, Fiona.
Forces went in both in helicopters and on the ground. They're searching for mines and booby traps left by the Serbs following their withdrawal. British soldiers came across more than 30 Serb military and paramilitary troops and disarmed them. Behind the initial force of British, French and American troops is a multinational force for Kosovo, which will number around 50,000.
Are now moving along this road into Kosovo, deeper towards the capital, Pristina, and they're now starting to flow quite quickly. What happened here earlier this morning at dawn at 5 a.m. when this mission started was that the paratroopers and the Gurkhas and the combat engineers from the British Army went in and started securing the heights above this road. To the right and the left of me here, heights where they feared there may be some Serb renegade elements who might have challenged them. Helicopters are now patrolling that area, and the other main priority for the troops was to clear the tunnels and the bridges along this road where it was thought there might be mines. At least one mine was found and detonated, I understand, and along the bridges it was feared there might be explosives.
And that was Ben Ruff.
What can happen? So they were determined that it would be safe before they let the troops go through. But as you can see, the armour is now moving again. We've had, I would reckon now, about 20 Challenger tanks, 100 or more lightly armoured vehicles. We've had bridge building equipment. We've had a very big, heavy engineering equipment. We've had air defence systems. I understand there are big field guns about to go through any minute, 6 of the 24 that are here to be deployed. So they are moving in some big, heavy weapons, and they're moving them in again in some numbers after a lull because of that trouble in the tunnel.
It seems to underline that part of their task will be to rebuild bridges as they move along the route, if they have all of this building equipment with them.
Well, the equipment will enable them to, you'll have to bear with me a moment, there's another big heavy weapon going through here. The bridge building equipment will help them to get across any areas where the bridges have been destroyed, either by NATO action or by the Serbs in all the action that's been going on there. And also, if they're particularly uncertain about a particular bridge because they think it might be booby-trapped, it will give them a way around if necessary. But they're determined to clear the road into Pristina as quickly as possible, to be in Pristina hopefully by nightfall, and to have a headquarters set up there so that the vast majority of men and weapons can start to move in. Men and weapons like these heavy guns, which you can see passing by me now. This is big machinery, this is big weaponry. This is a message to the Serbs that if they have any ideas of going back on their word, they are going to lose a fight if they pick it with NATO. NATO won't be looking for trouble, obviously, but it's determined it won't be aggressed against.
Well, how great do you think the risk is that they would indeed be fired upon, either by retreating Serb forces or perhaps by members